Here's a short video by popular demand. We're going to make a stripper deck. If you want to have a stripper deck and not have to pay money for one, you can use an inexpensive deck and create one of your own. And you can actually make it professional quality if you just have a little bit of care. Put a little bit of time into it. You will need some devices. The first thing you're going to need is you're going to need some sort of a paper cutter, like a craft type cutter for cardstock. And you want to make sure that it is sharp and that it has enough space on it to cut through the length of a playing card. And you also need to have enough space on it to lay two playing cards side by side without running out of space. So you're going to have one of those. Again, it needs to be very sharp because you're going to want to make very clean cuts. Now, you can find card cutters that are out on the market. They're mostly antiques, and these were created specifically for making gaff cards. Most of those cutters do a lot of different things. They will cut cards in many, many different types of ways, and they are changeable rigs. Those, however, cost hundreds of dollars. Some of them may even be thousands of dollars because they are antiques. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that you can't get equal results with cheap technology like this. And you just want to consider that to people in the early part of the 20th century, this is, space age technology at a time when the term space age wasn't even thought of, okay? So this is perfectly adequate for what we're going to do. What we need to do, though, is we need to create a way to rig so that each card is cut exactly the same way all the way through. Now, there are other ways to make stripper deck cards, or a full stripper deck, and you can search around on YouTube and find those. Some of them will use a technique similar to this, although I think my rig will be very, very simple compared to many of those, much, much easier to do. There's also a very popular one that was put out by Brian Brushwood on his series Scam School a number of years ago, and I've done that. Which involves sanding down the side of a deck. I found that this is a little bit cleaner than doing that, and it also ends you with cards that look very normal at the end, whereas the sanding sort of procedure, you get a little bit of strange warping on the one side of the card that is kind of perceivable by the human eye just on examination. We're going to make a deck that looks essentially perfect in most any way that a spectator would note, and even most magicians. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to do a two-sided cut. You can theoretically cut a stripper deck cutting only one side, but I highly recommend that you cut both sides so that you can save the margins on the back design such that you would not notice any sort of irregularities from one side to the other. So let's get to it. I have a deck of cards here, and by the way, you can get cards fairly cheaply, and you should use new cards when you do this. Do not use an old deck for a couple of reasons. A stripper deck should have very, very secure cardstock that is not softened and warped in any way, because when you cut, you want to make the cleanest cut possible. And also, if you consider what you use a stripper deck for, typically you're going to be stripping cards out. That's not the only way to use a stripper deck, but typically you're going to strip cards out, and you want them to be very clean and very smooth and really fresh out of the box. So you don't want your stripper deck to be used and old such that when you go to actually strip cards out, you're working against the age of the cards. Okay, so new cards. I highly recommend that you look for these. In the United States, we have this sold at a lot of different department type stores like Walmart or Target, and even at drugstores like Rite Aid or CVS or Walgreens. You can find a box of 4 decks, and they come in red and black. The black decks look kind of neat. They look pretty special. I have one over here, and it just is a black design instead of a blue, so that looks kind of interesting. These are very cheap. Usually you can get this set of 4 for under $10, and I'm also finding that the decks that United States Playing Card Company is cutting lately are more and more traditional cut. Now, not that that matters to most people. It doesn't even really matter to me, but if that's something that concerns you, they seem to be adding the process of flipping the card stock, and even these relatively inexpensive bicycle sets are typically coming traditionally cut, so that's something to think about. $10. Very, very cheap. Okay, so let's get into it. Here's what you need. You need to have the cutter, you need to have some double stick tape, and all you need for your rig is actually the advertisement cards from the new deck. Okay, so every deck comes usually with a couple of extra cards in addition to the jokers. Sometimes if it's a deck that is intended for, magicians, like something that Theory 11 would put out, this is a Citizens deck, it will come with a double backer as one of those cards. Typically, just a regular deck of playing cards will have an advertisement card and maybe another card that has the rules of the game or something like that. You're going to need one of these, and you can use the other one to test a card, but typically you probably won't need to. All you need to do is be careful. So here's what I did. I took 2 pieces of double-sided tape, and I just lined them up here on the board such that I'll be able to tape down this card as my backside of the rig. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this card, the first card in the deck, and I'm going to set it in the cutter such that the top edge of the card is right up against the measuring block right here, and then I'm also going to put my fingernail right here to make sure that the card does not extend beyond the edge of the cutter right here. So I want this top corner to meet right at the edge of the cutting line. We are only going to shave one side of the card, and we're going to maintain one corner at the top that is going to be full width. So this side will be a little bit shorter than that side. Once I think I have things kind of lined up, I'm going to take my advertisement card from the deck. I'm going to place this in here on top of my pieces of tape. The double stick tape is going to be used to hold this card in place. Now what I want to do is I want to line this up such that the top edge is right at the cutting line, and the bottom edge should come to about, less than a millimeter. I mean, it should be very, very small amount, the tiniest little amount at the very bottom edge. Once I have that lined up, I'll place my other card here on top of that tape. And once I do this once, I'll only need to do it once, and I can leave it in place for all the other cards. So this is what I'm going to have. I think I've got it right there. So this is what I'm looking at. When I hold my card in place, I want it to be square against this card over here, which is taped down. And I want to make sure that it's sitting flush and tight up against the top of the measuring block. So now, if I'm holding it tight against that line, I should have the cutter bypass the top corner and then cut a very, very small amount. You can see how tiny this is down here onto this bottom edge. The smallest amount possible, just a tiny, tiny little bit. So we'll do this once. I'll hold this nice and tight up against that, and then I'll cut down through. And I want to also hold it tight on the edge right here so that it doesn't buckle. And it'll shave off just the littlest small amount from about halfway down through the card all the way to the bottom edge. Once I've done that, I'll take this card, which should look like that, and actually you probably will not need to round these edges because the cut we're making is so tiny. This won't really be perceivable to people. That's one thing you can get when you cut one-sided only. If you cut deep enough to make a good stripper, you will have a really, really stark corner right there. But this is probably nothing that we're going to have to worry about. Once I've done that card, I will set it aside, and then I will do another card. Now, I don't have to line anything up. All I have to do is make sure that the card is sitting flush against my rigged card over here that's taped down and flush against the top edge. And I want to make sure that this is sitting inside of that cutting blade. And down here, this should automatically line up at about exactly the same spot as the other card. And then I run this down. Now, you want to put some pressure on the blade against the cutting block so that you're cutting very, very cleanly. Okay, and then there's another one. So I've cut that one down through. And then I'll set this aside. Now I'll go all the way through my deck and I'll cut every single card like this. Now, through the magic of TV editing, I have a whole deck that has been cut, and we have all the shavings out of the way. Now I'm going to cut the other side. Now what we'll do is we'll take the first card that we cut, and what we want to do is we're going to flip it. We're going to flip it this way so that we have the cut side now against the block over here, against my rig. And then I have a fresh side on this side. Now the idea is that at the very top, I want to have a full width, and at the bottom, I'm going to have a slightly decreased amount. Now I'm going to need to move my my rig over here. So what I'll do is I'll line up my card. I'll pull up my rigged card over here. And I'm going to do the same kind of thing. I'm going to line my card up now. I have my cut end down here. So this is the cut side from the first cut. I'm going to line it up so that the top edge is sitting inside the cutting block, inside the blade, nice and tight. So I'm not going to cut this top corner. And then I want this part to be sitting out a little bit, just like before, just the slightest little amount. And then I'm going to take my card over here and I'm going to line this up and set it down on the tape. So this is the new position. So actually I think I need to move that over a little bit more. Try to line this up again. This is where most of the work goes in, is just in setting the first card. So I think I've got it now, right about there. And I'll set my rig card right here, push it down on the tape. Now I should be good to go. So this should look very familiar. I have the slightest bit amount over here that is open, sitting out over, and then this should be sitting flush up at the top. So now I can go through all of my cards. I just want to make sure that I'm taking the card that I used before and I flip it and lay it in so that the cut part is down at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to now cut the entire deck again going this way. So the first one, I'll cut down, shave off a little bit. You get that little bit hanging out there. And then I'll set that one down, and then I'll pick up the next one. And we'll set this in tight. And I will shave that one. And now you can see on these cards, on the bottom edge, there is a shorter length than there is at the top. But it's not really perceivable. If you note on the back, other than the fact that this is cut off center from the factory a little bit, you'll note that the corners look very, very clean. It doesn't look, there's nothing really obvious about this, even with that slight sharp edge on there. There's not really anything you need to do about it because we took material off of both sides. So that is how you cut a deck. I'm going to run through all these other cards and then we'll take a look at the deck. Okay, so we've cut through all the cards. Again, it's a brand new fresh deck, and you'll note that it looks pretty clean all the way around. I haven't had to round any corners because we shaved only the tiniest bit amount from either side, and it looks very, very square. It feels very square. A person could probably handle these and they wouldn't notice anything about them until you take a card out and reverse it. So we have a 2 of hearts there, and now you'll note that there is a wider thickness at one end. You can see the little bit of a protrusion right here than at the other end, and of course that is so that you would be able to control that card out and strip it out from inside. So this is how you can create a stripper deck. You can do various kinds of effects with a stripper deck. If you're going to use the deck for a stage type performance, I highly recommend that you cut a little bit deeper on one side. And of course, if it's a stage performance kind of event, you wouldn't really need to clean up the corners then either. You just need something that's going to work from a distance for people. If you're going to be doing close-up magic, you probably would want to cut that very thin, and you would want to limit the types of effects that you do with the deck. You probably would not do a triumph routine with a deeply cut or a thin cut stripper deck because there would be a little bit of discrepancy. You might not get all the cards out. So this is cut fairly thin. This would be for more close-up kinds of scenarios. One quick note about performing with a stripper deck, and that is to avoid the worst trick ever with a stripper deck, and it looks something like this. You have a card selected. It is returned, obviously, in the other direction, and then you do like what I demonstrated there a moment ago. You just take the deck and you say, and then I'm going to take out your card, right? Don't do that. You want to make sure that you're using the stripper deck as a tool to avoid having to do various controls. That is the benefit of a stripper deck. Now, what kinds of controls can you avoid? Well, one kind of control is that you don't need to hold a break with a stripper deck. For example, if I have a card in there reversed, I can feel where that is at, and I should be able to riffle into and cut to onto that card fairly easily. Okay. Another way to use a strip deck is to disguise the stripping motion in some other kind of shuffle or control. For example, I could have a card selected like this and returned in reverse so that I can function the deck. And then if I go into a Hindu shuffle, I could strip the card out and then I can continue to strip packets from on top. And this would look like a Hindu type shuffle. What I've done is I've actually controlled the card to the bottom. And then I can go on from there as if I had done some other kind of more difficult control to move the card in. So that is the benefit of using a strip deck. A stripper deck is also very useful when doing table card magic. So if you're doing gambling type demonstrations, you can take a 4 of a kind and you can have them put into the deck, taken out of the deck, put into the deck, and then you can always come back to them. So if we just pull the queens out very quickly, if I was doing some sort of table work, I could have these cards taken out, and then I could have them replaced in reverse. Okay, and the audience wouldn't know that that's what's going on here. And then I would be able to do some kind of stripping motion from the table where I could strip those cards out, and then I could strip additional cards on top. And what I've done is I've actually controlled my cards now down to the bottom, and I have all my queens together. So you're using a stripper deck to avoid having to do other types of controls. That is the best use of a stripper deck. So that's how to make one. Professional grade quality. You can cut it at any depth that you want. You can make it pretty severe. You can make it very, very thin, like what I did with this one. And for just a couple of bucks for a deck of cards, if you're buying in bulk, a fairly inexpensive cutter that's sharp, a little bit of double stick tape, and some consistency, and just a little bit of time. I actually cut through a whole deck probably in a matter of, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes per side, so it doesn't really take all that long to get a good quality product. So good luck with that, and I wish you all a happy magicking.